From the KUDZUKIAN studios in Memphis, Tennessee, this is Artivism with your host, Linda Steele. Welcome back to another episode of Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm your host, Linda Steele. Today's episode features fellow Amherst College graduate and my friend, artist, photographer, filmmaker Sarah Bird. Sarah believes that art and design can catalyze us to protect Earth's precious biodiversity. She is really, especially within the past few years, very interested in trees, and she works at the intersection of art and environmental justice. We are going to be talking about her background. How did she become this artist, filmmaker, photographer? We're going to talk about her current body of work and her current exhibition in Brooklyn. And then we're going to talk about what's coming up for her in 2019 and 2020. Stay tuned for this episode of Artivism. Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Funking up your airwaves and jamming the good information in your ear. Once again, it's Funky Politics.
Funky Politics.
Funky Politics.
KUDZUKIAN. Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Hi, this is Linda Steele, and as I said, we're here talking to Sarah Bird on Artivism. Hey, Sarah, how are you doing?
Hi, Linda. I'm great. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad to be able to talk to you and find some time. I am just, every time I see your work, I'm just amazed. So what I'd like to do is just dive right in there and tell us about your story, the Sarah Bird story. How did you become an artist? And going back to childhood, and was this something you always wanted to do? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I am one of those people who from childhood knew that I was going to be an artist. But the funny thing about it is that I thought everybody was an artist. Like I didn't understand that what I cared about and what I did was different than anybody else. And I had a really eclectic childhood. And just to give you the short version, I was born in Australia. My family is Australian on my mother and my father's side. We moved to the United States when I was a baby. But then from age 5 to age 15, I lived in France twice, I lived in England, and I lived in New York one other time. There was a lot of back and forth. My parents split up. I was living with one parent and then the other, and then each of them moved with work. So the net result of that was that I lived in these amazing cities, and there was something that I found in museums that was a refuge for me. And so not only did I make art all the time, I would, it was the 70s, and I would take myself to museums on my own when I was 10 years old. And it's really that continuity of looking at art and making art has really been with me my whole life. But having said that, what I do now in my artwork and the artworks that I make and the environmental and political side of my artwork, that has really only coalesced, I would say, in the past 5 years, honestly, even though I've been making art for decades.
Wow. I know you went to Amherst College. Shout out, woohoo, Amherst, hashtag Amherst proud.
I sure did.
Did you major in art history, or what type of work did you do at Amherst?
Well, believe it or not, I did a senior thesis in sculpture, and one of the very few students, I think, who ever did that. So when I went to Amherst, I had come from, I went to high school, first 2 years of high school in London, and then I went to a boarding school in Connecticut. And it had sort of been at that point drummed into me that, and I think this is an unfortunate part of our culture in some ways, is that like art history is serious, but making art is sort of like, well, that's nice here. But when I got to Amherst, I thought, okay, like I need to be academic. Art history is an academic subject, and I studied art history. But one thing that Amherst did at the time, and I think they still do, was that the fine arts major is both studio practice and art history. And so you have to, if you're an art history major, you have to studio art and vice versa. And it got me back to that visceral feeling of like, oh, like this is where I need to be. And this is when I feel alive. And this is when I, all other things sort of like shed from my mind. And I'm, I guess what they would call fully present. And so, interestingly enough, Amherst is sort of what got me back in the studio, and then I did a senior thesis in sculpture. And then after college, I worked for a few years doing like documentary stuff, and I worked at an auction house. But then I knew that I needed to go, or I wanted to kind of immerse myself again in art making, and so I did an MFA in sculpture at California College of the Arts in San Francisco. And that was an amazing experience, and I'm still in touch with some of my mentors and professors from, that was in the 92 to 94. I did my MFA, so that was a good long while ago. That really launched me, sort of, in terms of the artwork that I started doing then, including an installation with 10,000 eucalyptus leaves, each dipped in beeswax. That installation was the first time that I felt that what I cared about and the ideas I was working with actually manifest physically in an artwork that succeeded. Like the idea and the manifestation came together. So that was, there was no going back after that.
You're listening to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm your host, Linda Steele, and I'm having this unique conversation with Sarah Bird about her artwork and how she came into becoming an artist. Sarah, let's pick up from where you were talking about in San Francisco. I did have a question. How did going to California College of the Arts and San Francisco inspire you? Because I know, they talk about trees and nature. That's a phenomenal place as well. Did that inspire you and your the next phase of your work at all, being there? Absolutely. Yeah. The one of the things that has kind of traveled with me in my life is this sense of displacement and dislocation. And as I mentioned, I am Australian. I don't sound Australian, but I am Australian, and I would go back there when I was little, really for a couple of months every other year. And, my parents would take me out of school and with a little homeschooling, but basically I was hanging out with my grandparents. And, that's a really kind of essential part of who I am. And at the same time, I'm not Australian. I never went to school there. I sound American. I went to French school and American school and lived in England. So when I got to California and I smelled the eucalyptus trees, there was something like a visceral kind of physical sense of being home. So I've discovered over the years that nature and my sort of sensory connection to nature is actually what gives me a sense of home. And so I discovered when I went to San Francisco in the 90s to do my MFA. And I'm still working with trees, as you know. In fact, I've, the past couple of years, I've really been focusing on redwood trees. Yes.
And so, of course, the coast redwoods are species that only live in the coastal range of California, and then they just go up to the southern border of Oregon. But my relationship with redwood trees is so deep to explain, but it feels like I'm reconnecting with long-lost family. And I feel a little kooky saying that, but there's no other way to describe it, that kind of emotional connection.
Where else can you talk about redwood trees and sculpture and Amherst College in Australia and London and France, but here on Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network? I'm your host, Linda Steele, and I'm having this really exciting conversation with artist and artivist Sarah Bird.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
3.
Am I going to sit there and argue with you over we had steak 2 days ago, I want chicken?
B.
I'm going to be spicy all the time. I don't care if I'm single or not.
C.
I think that the foundation is how you were brought up.
3 Black Chicks on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
KUDZUKIAN! Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Welcome back to Artivism, and I'm having a great conversation with Sarah Bird, artivist. We're talking about redwood trees and her inspiration over the years. And Sarah, I just wanted you to dive right into the current work and your current exhibition in Brooklyn. And also, like I said, I'd love to talk about those photographs that you've been doing for the past 25 years. So just go on, dive in.
Okay, dive in. So at the moment I have a show simply called Trees, which is up through January 2nd, 2019. And it consists of photographs and a kind of sculpture that I can talk about, and I've started doing some larger scale drawings. So M.Patmos is M.Patmos, and she is a clothing designer, and she's just recently opened this space on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn. Yay. And so it's really, yay! So it's a kind of hybrid art space, clothing shop, and she and I have been friends for quite a while, and we really have this, I feel like, a lovely kind of collaborative relationship, because the things that she cares about in terms of making her clothes and designing them, and the sustainability of the fibers and the proper wages that she pays her producers either in New York or the alpaca farmers in Peru or the people she employs in Nepal, is all an important part of her design practice and her clothing business. And so over the years, we've just had this lovely kind of symbiotic relationship like that. And when she was opening this new space in a really wonderful part of Brooklyn, and she said, would I be her inaugural show? Obviously, I was thrilled. And it's so that's the relationship with M.Patmos. And the trees that I'm showing, some of them from a series of what I think of as portrait photographs of trees, of redwood trees. And when I started shooting the redwoods, it became clear to me immediately that I needed to show them life-size. And so there are 2 ways to do that. There's to show sections, so that so let's say there's a 3 by 4 foot photograph, but that photograph is true scale to the tree, so it's just a small part of an actual tree. But what I love about it is to have that relationship, that physical connection to the tree in its true scale.
Yes.
And I find them incredibly beautiful, but at the same time, there's this aspect of it, which to me is really important, which is that in our Western culture, we have thought, unfortunately, of nature as a commodity, and that has led, unfortunately, inevitably, to a lot of the environmental, the precarious environmental situation that we're in with global warming and everything else at the moment. And so not only am I interested in showing the trees for their, to kind of bear witness to their beauty, but also their importance in terms of scientific, how much carbon they sequester and all that stuff. And then the third aspect is that making portraits of these trees, to me, feels like trying to kind of elevate them in the way that, let's say, traditionally we do portrait paintings or portrait photographs of important people or our ancestors or whatever. So shifting that away from humans to the trees is a sort of subtle action for me to say, like, hang on a second. Like, this hierarchy that we've set up where humans at their top and animals are sort of in the middle and the natural, tree plants are at the bottom, it is really a destructive system that we've created. And let's open that up. Let's look at that a little bit.
You're listening to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network. I'm your host, Linda Steele, and I'm talking about sustainability, wage fairness, fibers, and trees. And this is probably the only place you can hear this type of conversation. I read about, this importance of trees. You say something really important about trees, which made me think about it, which is like they have all of these stories, and that's what I'm hearing, but also how people don't really think about trees and how they sustain humanity. How there are friends and how they actually make the environment clean for us to breathe and all of those sorts of things. Can you share some of your thoughts about trees and even more about just your philosophy on trees and their place in humanity and in the world and society?
I've really been so lucky in the past couple of years in pursuing, artwork about trees and really investigating redwood trees in particular and being among them and hiking in those groves to have been introduced to some really amazing scientists. And in my own research and in talking to scientists, I've learned so many things that in a way kind of validate my intuition about it, which is always a nice thing. And so the Japanese have this term tree bathing, in which it's considered, a kind of normal, good, healthful activity, like on a weekend, or if you have some time off, you just go and be in trees and experience kind of the energy and, of course, the fact that they generate carbon, they generate oxygen, and they sequester carbon. So, many cultures understand that simply being around trees is good for our spiritual and our mental health. And actually, there was an article in the New York Times just in the past couple of weeks about how urban renewal projects are finding that, lo and behold, the more small parks or even just a couple of trees on a street actually affects the mental health of the residents of those areas. So the more greenery and the more trees you have, the stress is lower. People report less depression and suicide, and it's really the scientific research is actually supporting, my sense that trees are magical. And there's been interesting research recently also about carbon sequestration. So as we know, global warming has a lot to do with the fact that there's too much carbon. The Earth is releasing too much carbon. And one of the things that scientists have just published in the past year and a half is that post-redwood groves sequester 3 times as much carbon per acre than even the Amazon rainforest. So obviously this is no diss on the rainforest. God knows we need to protect that as well. But the way in which these incredibly ancient species of trees and can really help us keep a cap on global warming. So it's more essential than ever that we help regenerate these forests and, of course, protect anything that is still around.
Wow. Science, ecology, climate change, art and trees. You're listening to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network. I'm your host, Linda Steele, having a fascinating conversation with Sarah Bird.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Best in Blue.
That means we go to the schools, we go to the churches, we do all types of programs to try to build the relationship between law enforcement and the community.
Best in Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
KUDZUKIAN!
Artivism.
You're listening to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm your host, Linda Steele. Sarah, let's dive right in because there's so much and so much depth to your work, and you've been doing this for a while. One of my favorite activities and part of your practice is following your photographs of your bed for the past 25 years. Can you talk about that?
So as you note, just this week marks 25 years of a photographic project that I've been doing every day. And so I get out of bed in the morning, basically I turn around, I stand at the end of the bed, and I take a photograph. So I started October 29th, 1993. I was in grad school at the time. And, why? The question is why, right? At the time, and actually I'm still interested, but at the time I was interested in art making that could express kind of invisible phenomena such as the passing of time. So how do we mark the passage of time? And obviously there are many ways to do it. And I was also interested in artworks that kind of seem a little more quiet, that is something that maybe you notice out of the corner of your eye. But the accumulation of those things is often, what we experience in a day. And so, and then there's also a kind of visual beauty to me to the kind of chaos of, what's revealed from the night before. And there's the presence of the body, I feel, is visible in there, and yet the body is absent. And so for me, it talks about the passage of time and visibility or invisibility, and about absence, and about a kind of accumulation of memory. And so when I started doing it, I thought, okay, I'm going to do this for 30 days or whatever. I'll do it for a lunar month or something. And I did that, and I was like, oh yeah, that is not enough. That is just like not enough material. And so I thought, my next goal was, okay, 6 months. And along the way to 6 months, it might have been somewhere around the 4-month mark, I realized, I'm going to keep doing this until I find a good reason to stop. And I have never found that reason. Wow. And in fact, it continually surprises me that what it reveals over the course of time, and the things that I never could have anticipated. And some of it is really personal and really vulnerable. I mean, I've been married and I've been divorced and I had a child, and all of these things that, are very sort of intimate experiences in my life are revealed through this kind of sidelong glance at my day.
Now, have you exhibited that work? Because I've seen photos over the years, like all of them compiled. Have you exhibited them, or do you plan to all 25 years? Or tell us about that.
I have only really shown 2 years worth. So when I showed it in that version, let me back up. When I started shooting them, I was printing them in 4 by 6 inch black and white, sort of like machine prints, like it's kind of, because it was the 90s and I was shooting on film, 35 millimeter film, and getting them done at the local, like photo place. And now, of course, they're digital, but one of the ways I've shown them is to pin together in chronological order the 4 by 6 black and white prints, like one after the other, and it makes this kind of Florida feeling grid that is both regimented through the days, but also each day is different and sort of chaotic, and that paradox, that sort of contradiction is really exciting to me. So to answer your question, I've only shown 2 years of them, and that was quite a long time ago, and I would absolutely love to show all 25 years. It seems like the time is right.
Yes.
And so I can picture it, and I talking to another artist curator friend who's like, we have to find the right space for this. So hopefully that is going to happen. But honestly, I don't know. And it's probably at least a year away.
Exactly. I will look forward to it, and we have to keep in touch about that, because I think it's going to be magnificent, and I look forward to it. And Artivism fans, you'll be looking forward to it. We'll keep you informed. And we've been talking about redwood trees and 25 years of bed photos. Where else can you hear this but on Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network? I'm your host, Linda Steele, talking to the photographer behind the trees and the 25 years of beds, and that's Sarah Bird. So Sarah, I want to hear what's next for Sarah. What are these exciting things that you're working on?
When I started shooting the redwood trees, my immediate desire was to photograph and print an entire redwood tree life size. So I'm working on a project. I have some amazing collaborators to do just that. So a 320-foot photograph of an entire tree, which would most likely be placed on the side of a building in an effort or in a kind of commentary on reforesting an urban environment that, of course, previously was forested. So that's a longer-term project. It's called Mapping Giants. And I've been working with this amazing nonprofit in San Francisco called Save the Redwoods League. And so that's a kind of project that needs a lot of partners. It needs money. It needs, support from lots of places. But there's been a lot of progress on that front, so that's really exciting. I did an exhibition just this past September in San Francisco in conjunction with the Global Climate Action Summit, in which I did a kind of iteration of this life-size tree, in which on the ground I did an outline in aluminum tape of a 320-foot tree, but on the ground. And so the full scale of it was visible, and we walked it beginning to end. And one could sort of witness the enormity and the majesty of these trees. And at the same time, to me, it functions as a crime scene outline. So let's not fool ourselves like we have killed them. And so, in an ideal world, I can combine something that hopefully is beautiful with, that has a more pointed aspect to it, which is that let's be aware of what we're doing and what's happening. So that's Mapping Giants. There's another project that really dovetails into it, which is lovely, which is with a filmmaker named Lisa Landers, who's a wonderful science and nature filmmaker from the San Francisco Bay Area. And she actually asked me to participate in her film about redwoods. And so I'm a subject, actually, of this rather than the filmmaker, which I've done in the past. But her film is called Among Giants. So we love the term giants because, of course, redwoods are the tallest living things on Earth. So Lisa's film is called Among Giants, and that's in production right now. And so she and I go out to the woods with her crew, and we talk about some of the things you and I have talked about, Linda, the science and the ecology of what's happening with redwoods, but also the mystery and the magic and our kind of emotional and spiritual connection to the forest is in production, and she's going to be shooting, and I'll be participating in that probably for most of 2019. So that won't be until 2020 or so, but that's a feature to look for.
So Among Giants in 2020, Mapping Giants 2019?
I'm crossing my fingers as you say that. So yeah, it could happen. It could happen in 2019. I have a lot of pieces in place. As I'm sure you've heard from many artist friends, I need funding.
Yes.
And so I have some great institutional support, and I have some funding, and I need someone to come along and say, we love this idea, we want to support this intersection of art and environmentalism. So that's my pitch for it right there.
Well, if someone wants to support your work, how do they reach you?
I have a website, and you can reach me through there, sarahbirdstudio.com. And there's information there how to email me, and I would love to hear from anyone who's interested.
Are you on Instagram too?
I am on Instagram, Sarah Bird Studio. Check out what I'm doing.
Perfect.
There's another thing that I do, which I really love, is that I do portraits of trees, not just redwoods, but let's say a family has a tree they're really close to, or a lovely couple has commissioned me to do a portrait of the tree under which they got engaged 30 years ago. So I've been doing that stuff too, which I have to say is good for the soul. It's wonderful.
It's been so wonderful just catching up with you and really listening to all of the wonderful work you've been doing over the years and right now. I want to just say thank you for calling in, and I'm going to make that show in Brooklyn before January 8th, right? No, 2nd.
January 2nd, yep.
So that's at M.Patmos on Atlantic Avenue.
380 Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. So people can find M.Patmos on the web or can find information through my Instagram or my website, Sarah Bird Studio.
Perfect. I will see you in Brooklyn.
Hey, I can't wait to see you, and thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing on your show. It's fabulous.
Thank you so much. You are listening to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm your host, Linda Steele, and I've been having such a lovely and fascinating conversation with artist and artivist Sarah Bird.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Riffin' on jazz.
When two friends get together to kick it
about jazz, it's called Riffin' on Jazz.
Catch us riffing on jazz every week right here on your favorite broadcast or podcast platforms.
Riffin' on jazz on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
KUDZUKIAN! Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
I learned so much from this show by talking to Sarah Bird, especially around the intersection of art, environmental justice, and social justice. I hope you did too. And if you didn't get a chance, please check us out, the entire show, on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or TuneIn. You're going to hear us talk about Sarah Bird's journey as an artist from Australia to UK to France, California, and to Amherst College. We talked about her work with redwood trees and 25 years of photographing her bed. And then we talked about her upcoming projects, Mapping Giants, which you should see sometime in 2019, we hope, and Among Giants, a film in 2020. You can catch Sarah also teaching at Brooklyn College, Yale University, and St. Anne's. It's been a pleasure. You've been listening to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm your host, Linda Steele. You will find the Artivism podcast at the intersection of art and social activism. Artivism is executive produced by ArtUp, hosted by Linda Steele, produced, directed, and distributed by KUDZUKIAN.